Hello friends, this is Dr. Jayashree Joshi and I will be talking on some of the mechanical properties of dental materials. As every one of us is aware that a dentist uses n number of materials directly or indirectly. Directly means inside the oral cavity in the form of restorations. Indirectly means outside the oral cavity or auxiliary materials you can say. For getting the maximum advantage of each of the materials, one must have a thorough knowledge of the structure, the composition, properties, and the behavior of the material in the oral environment. Now, what is the importance to know the properties? The materials are used inside the oral cavity. They are subjected to attack by the oral environment. Also, they are subjected to masticatory forces. They get also affected by various cleansing and polishing materials and the other materials which are used in oral cavity has effect on each other. Outside the oral cavity, the materials need to be stored. Now the materials are stored before the use of the material and after the use of the material also. Now before the use of the material, if you know the properties of the material, then you know how long the material can be stored and in which condition it has to be stored. Similarly, after its use, with the knowledge of the properties, one can store the material. For example, if you have made impression with a particular impression material and if you have the knowledge of that impression material, you know how long the impression can be stored outside the oral cavity before pouring it and in what conditions it has to be stored. Similarly, during the fabrication of indirect restorations, one must have a thorough knowledge of the properties, the composition, the structure of the material. Similar with the finishing, polishing, and repair of the materials. So, for understanding the performance of the material inside as well as outside the oral cavity, one must be equipped with the fundamental knowledge of the properties. Also, it helps in proper selection of the material. Now, the role of the dentist is more or less similar to an engineer. Now, engineer, whenever he is building or constructing a building, he has a thorough knowledge of the soil on which he is going to construct a building. He has a knowledge about the weather. He has a knowledge about the properties of the materials. So with this basic knowledge, he can select or set up the condition for a situation such that a prediction of eventual success of a project is reasonably ensured. Now, a contractor is responsible for joining the beams, but the engineer is responsible for the design of the bridge. If the engineer knew nothing about the physical and chemical properties of the materials, then the structure would undoubtedly fail. So same is the case of dentist. Whenever a patient comes, the dentist analyzes the situation by intraoral, extraoral examination, dental history, medical history, and with the basic knowledge of the properties of the material, he selects the best possible material for the patient. But for this, he should have a thorough knowledge of the properties. Only if he knows the properties of each of these materials is he in a position to make such judgments. For the purpose of this study, we can divide the properties into two broad groups, that is mechanical and non-mechanical. Mechanical properties are those properties which are concerned with the application of forces, and non-mechanical properties are not concerned with the application of forces. So my friends, today I'll be talking on some of the mechanical properties. Now the materials used in dentistry are subjected to application of forces either during the process of fabrication of a structure or subsequently during its use in the mouth. Now my dear friends, with dentistry I've also done psychology. So always I love to correlate dentistry with psychology, and you will find it interesting to correlate these two subjects. Now in the word physics and psychology, there are so many letters which are common, and so I found many of the human traits and the physical properties have certain things in common which will be helpful for you to understand the properties and to retain those properties for a longer time. Now coming to force. You can see this picture. A boss is forcing something on his junior. He's trying to convince his junior to do in a particular way. So what exactly forcing means? It is nothing but compelling or restraining without regard to individual wish. Now how it is related to the force in physics? So what we have to keep it in mind is that here the boss is trying to change the mind of his junior. So what you have to keep it in mind is a change. So when it comes to physics, when we're talking about the force, suppose you apply force to an object, the object changes its motion. So what is a force? It is an action which produces or tends to produce or changes the motion of the body. And it is measured in pounds, kilogram, Newton, and measured by mass multiplied by acceleration. So understood? Force is nothing but the action producing or tending to produce change. Now depending upon the direction, there are different types of forces, and in dentistry there are three main types of forces. That is tensile force, compressive force, and shear force. Now tensile force, when you are stretching something, that means the object is increasing in length. So this tensile forces results in an increase in the length along the direction of the force. Compression, it results in decrease in the length along the direction of the force. You are compressing something. And shear means a sliding displacement. So these are the three main types of forces. Now, the first important property in dentistry which is dependent upon the force is stress. So, what is stress in human? You might have experienced stress so many times. Today this word has become so common that even a KG student is under stress, isn't it? So what is the stress? For example, exam stress. You are having the exam of dental materials. The time period for the preparation is very less. The course is very vast. The definitions are really very difficult to keep it in mind, and in that case, you become stressed out. So what exactly this stress means? So it is the body's natural defense mechanism against any challenge, demand, or any life event. Okay, so here the life event is examination. So something starts in your body. So basically it is the body's natural defense mechanism. So on encountering this stress, our body gets stimulated. It starts releasing stress hormones and it triggers fight or flight response. Now the changes which are occurring in the body we will be discussing in stream. So here what you have to keep it in mind that it is the internal reaction of a body to the external stimuli. So now we are switching onto the stress of non-living object. Again, if you are applying force on a particular object, that object will try to resist that force. So when the force acts on a body, tending to produce deformation, a resistance is developed inside the body to counteract this external force. This is a stress. It is an internal reaction to the external force, and it is usually equal in magnitude but opposite in direction. It is how to measure the stress. Now you cannot measure the internal resistance. So you can measure the external force because already in the definition we have seen that it is equal in magnitude. So while measuring the stress, we can measure the external force per unit area. So stress is measured as force upon area, and the units of measurements are kilogram per centimeter square, pounds per square inch, and megapascals. So got it, my friends? Stress is nothing but the internal reaction to the external force. Although we are measuring in terms of external force, but stress is the internal force which is resisting the external force. Now, depending upon the direction of the forces, there are three main types of stresses. That is tensile stress. That is again when you are stretching something, the inside resistance is created, which is called as a tensile stress. So it results when the body is subjected to two sets of forces moving away from each other but acting along the same plane. Second is compressive stress. It results when the body is subjected to two sets of forces acting towards each other along the same plane. That is when you are compressing something. The inside force which is resisting this compression is a compressive stress. And the third one is a shear stress. It results when the body is subjected to two sets of forces acting towards each other but not along the same plane. That is, you're sliding something. So that is a shear stress. Now, if it is extremely difficult to induce a stress of a single type in a body, in dentistry you may not find a single type of stress. For example, if a wire is stretched, tensile stresses are created, but at the same time you will find compressive as well as shear stresses also. Now here you can see the example of a beam which is supported at two ends. Now if you apply forces in the center of the beam, it bends in the center. So when it bends in the center, you will find compression in the center. Then here you will find tension, that is tensile stresses, and here you can see shear stresses. This can be very well explained by giving the example of a 3-unit fixed partial denture. Now if the forces are acted towards the contact, the suspended member, then you will find the compressive as well as tensile stresses in the fixed partial denture. Now, whenever a stress is there, there has to be a change in the body which is called as a strain. Now, when you are stressed up, how do you know? How the others comes to know that you are stressed up? That is, something goes wrong in your body. So some changes occurs in your body. So what are these changes? In some you will find palpitation, in some gastric disturbance, in some headache, some will experience insomnia, some will have muscle ache, some will go into depression. So these are the different changes which are seen in the body. So similarly, when an object is stressed, it changes or it deforms. So this deformation is nothing but a strain. So how do you define strain? it is the degree of deformation due to stress. So it is described as change in dimension per unit dimension. No specific unit of measurement, it is a dimensionless quantity. So friends, do you understood the stress and strain? So when you are applying forces, an internal resistance is created inside the body, which is called as a stress, and there are some changes in the dimensions or a degree of deformation is seen in the object, which is called as a strain. Very simple. Now, strain can be of two types, that is elastic strain and plastic strain. Now, elastic strain, very simple. If you stretch an elastic and release the forces, it comes back to the original position. So when you are stretching it, it is changing its dimension. But as soon as you relieve the forces, it is coming back to its original dimensions. So that is called as an elastic strain. It is also called as temporary because as soon as you relieve the forces, it comes back to the original. And also it is called as elastic deformation. Now sometimes if you stretch the elastic n number of times, so one times comes that even after releasing the forces, it is not coming to its original dimensions. That means some amount of permanent deformation has taken place. So this is a plastic strain. Also it is called as permanent because it doesn't come back to the original dimensions. So two important types of strain are seen in dentistry, that is elastic and plastic. Now depending upon the three different types of stresses, you get corresponding strain, that is tensile strain when you are stretching something, compressive strain when you are compressing something, and shear strain when you are sliding something. So three types of strains, that is tensile strain, compressive strain and shear strain. Now what is Poisson's ratio? Now you are stretching something, you will find longitudinal strain, that is the length is increasing. At the same time you will find the lateral strain also, that means the cross-sectional area is getting reduced, isn't it? It is increasing in the length, but at the same time the cross-sectional area is getting reduced. So what is Poisson's ratio? It is the ratio of lateral strain to the longitudinal strain. Now when you put the stress and strain on a graph, you get interesting findings. There are various points which are shown in this diagram, which we will be discussing in details. Okay. Now you will find different points. Now the first point is A, which is proportional limit. That is, stress and strain are proportional to each other up to this point. Okay. Now short line from proportional limit to elastic limit. It represents the elastic deformation, that is from point A to point B. It is showing some deformation which is elastic in nature. Then the slope of the straight line, it represents the modulus of elasticity. Now the area below the modulus of elasticity within the elastic range is the resilience of the material. We will be discussing each point thoroughly later on. Now beyond this elastic limit, the curved part of the graph represents uniform plastic deformation up to this D point, which represents ultimate tensile strength. So ultimate tensile strength is the point up to which the material undergoes plastic deformation without necking or fracture. Again, I'll repeat, it is the point up to which the material undergoes plastic deformation without necking or without fracture. Now the length of the curved part up to the point D, it represents the ductility of the material. Now in case of brittle materials, the ultimate tensile strength and the fracture strength are more or less similar, or they coincide. So at this point, the brittle material usually fractures. But the materials which exhibit some elastic behavior do not fracture at this point. So at this point, if further stress is applied, a cross-sectional area over a short length begins to reduce. Okay? Here the cross-sectional area reduces, rapidly forming the neck. So here starts the necking. Now as the cross-sectional area has reduced, the stress which is required is also reduced, and hence the curve bends downwards. Now up to this E point, that is the fracture strength, where the material no longer withstand the stress, it fractures. The line from EL, that is B, up to E, that is fracture stem, represents the plastic range of the material, and the area under the entire length of this line up to the fracture strength up to E, it represents toughness. Okay, so now we will be discussing in details each point. Now the first one is proportional limit. Proportional limit, it shows the proportionality between what? Stress and strain. Now limit, every material has got a particular limit up to which the stress and strain are proportional to each other. Same is with the human being. Every human being has got a particular limit up to which he can bear the stresses, beyond which he will show some changes, permanent changes. Okay, so how will you define proportional limit? It is the maximum stress that a material withstands without permanent deformation. So stress and strain are proportional to each other. It shows the proportionality between stress and strain. It is the point on the stress strain graph where the plotting converts from straight line to a curvature. Now here you can see this is a straight line. This is a proportional limit, and from here the straight line converts to a curvature. Now next is the elastic limit. Now if you see the definition, the proportional limit and elastic limit are more or less same. It is the maximum stress a material withstand without permanent deformation. For all practical purposes, although the EL and PL are same, the only difference is that the strain value in elastic limit is not proportional to the applied stress because some amount of deformation has taken place, although it is elastic in nature. So both by definition are same. Now on the graph also, if you can see, this is a point just beyond the proportional limit, is the elastic limit. Now coming to yield point, it is the point just beyond the elastic limit, beyond which the permanent deformation starts. So up to that point, whatever deformation is occurring in the material is elastic in nature. So from this point onwards, the structure undergoes a pronounced degree of deformation on application of little additional stress. And what is yield strength? Strength is nothing but the maximum stress which is necessary to fracture a material. So it is the applied stress at which material exhibits a specified limiting deviation from proportionality of stress to strain. So it is the point just beyond the elastic limit from where the plastic deformation starts. Now coming to ultimate tensile strength. It is the greatest stress a material can withstand without undergoing fracture. As I told you, It is the end of the plastic deformation for the brittle material, and after necking, in case of elastic materials, it fractures later on. Now, coming to the ratio of stress and strain, which is called as modulus of elasticity. So, if any stress value equal to or less than the proportional limit is divided by its corresponding strain value, a constant of proportionality results, which is called as modulus of elasticity or Young's modulus. It is represented as E, that is stress upon strain. The unit of measurement is force per unit area, megapascals or pounds per square inch. Now this shows the stiffness of the material. Now when I say modulus of elasticity is high, when I say modulus of elasticity is high, now it is the ratio of stress to strain. When I say the value is high, that means the amount of stress is more, that is the application of forces are more, the stresses are more, and the amount of strain is less, that is the deformation is very less. That means the material is stiff. On the contrary, if I say the modulus of elasticity is low, then the low value of modulus of elasticity suggests that with the little application of the forces, the amount of deformation is more, isn't it? So strain value, when it is more as compared to stress within the proportional limit, then that shows the modulus of elasticity or the material is not stiff. Now, can you see this picture? What you can find in this picture? Now, this girl can easily do this exercise because of the flexibility of the joints. So, what does this flexibility means? So, again, coming back to the psychology, is it interesting, friends? Yes. So, flexibility of the mind. I say I am flexible, you are not flexible, she is flexible. So what does this mean? I am flexible means I am ready to accept the changes, I am ready to change my views, I am ready to quit the old thinking, I am ready to accept the new one. So basically, flexibility of the mind is described as the ability to adjust one's thinking from old situations to new situations, as well as the ability to overcome responses or thinking that have become habitual and adapt to new situations. So what exactly flexibility of mind means? It's a moldability, that is your mind is moldable, that ready to accept anything. I'm not rigid, I'm flexible. Okay. So you can use this word moldability in the material flexibility also. So when I'm talking about the flexibility of any non-living object, that means the material is moldable. Now when the material is moldable, when the amount of strain value, that is when the amount of deformation is high as compared to the amount of forces applied, isn't it? It is moldable, it is flexible, means the amount of strain which is seen is more as compared to that of stress. So it is described as the maximum amount of strain seen in the material when it is stressed to its proportional limit, isn't it? Maximum amount of strain, the changes which are seen in the material, and it is expressed as maximal flexibility and measured as proportional limit divided by modulus of elasticity. So from this mathematical equation, you can say if the modulus of elasticity of the material is low, the amount of flexibility will be high. So the amount of strain when it is high, the material is more flexible. Now we can give the example of the impression material. When you are using any elastic material in the dentulous arch where there are severe undercuts present, and in that cases, while removing the impression from the mouth, if the material is flexible, you can remove the impression from the mouth without hurting the patient, because the amount of strain is more. That is, during the removal, whatever stresses are encountered, that are sufficient to produce maximum amount of elastic deformation, which will be helped to remove the impression easily from the mouth. Now coming to the next important property is resilience. Now the noun resilience stems from the Latin resiliens, that is to rebound or recoil. Now as a character trait, resilience is a person's mental ability to recover quickly from misfortune, illness or depression. Like if you have come across any stress, then if you are resilient enough, you will come back to it, so your original condition very fast. It is not only the person's ability to bounce back, but their capacity to adapt in the face of challenging circumstances while maintaining a stable mental well-being. So again, here we have to keep it in mind that resilience is rebounding or recoiling back. Now here you can see a net, which is usually seen in circus during the play of the acrobat. Now usually the acrobat, after the completion of his play, either jumps or sometimes he falls on the net. Now because of the resiliency of the net, the acrobat doesn't get injured. Why? Because the net is resilient. Now what does this resilience mean? When an acrobat falls or jumps onto this trapeze net, the energy of his fall is absorbed by the resilience of the net. The net is deformed elastically by the impact so that its energy at the time of maximum deformation is equal to the energy of the acrobat at the time of impact. So what is happening? At the time of fall of the acrobat, the energy of the acrobat is getting absorbed by the net and the net is getting deformed elastically. When the energy of the net is released, the acrobat is again thrown into the air and the second impact occurs. And this continues. It is fortunate that some part of the energy is dissipated in the form of heat, otherwise the acrobat would never stop rebounding, isn't it? So resiliency is nothing but the energy which is absorbed by the net at the time of impact. Now we can give the example, you can give the example of a denture. If the person, a denture wearer person, has some injury on the soft tissue underlying the or on the denture bearing area, so usual line of treatment, we ask the patient to take out the denture and remain denture free for at least 10 to 15 days till the wound gets healed. But there are certain patients who doesn't want to remain without denture. So in that cases, we put denture liners or soft liners are used. Now these soft liners are very much resilient in nature. That means they absorbs the energy which is produced by the masticatory impact that would otherwise be transmitted through the denture. What happens because of this resilient material? Whatever the impact is occurring due to the mastication, it will not directly transmit it to the underlying tissues, but the energy will be absorbed by this resilient material. And then over a period of time, it slowly releases this energy. So the underlying tissues will never get hurt because of the direct impact of the masticatory forces. So that is the importance of resilience. So how you can describe resilience? It is the amount of energy absorbed by the material when it is stressed not to exceed its proportional limit. It is measured in terms of modulus of resilience and determined mathematically by R is equal to P square upon 2E. P is proportional limit. E is your modulus of elasticity, and the units of measurements are megajoules per cubic meter or inch pounds per cubic inch. Okay, so ideally the materials, if they are resilient, they will absorb the energy and then they slowly release the energy. Now the next important property is impact. Sudden impact. I've got a sudden impact of that person's speech. So what is this sudden impact? So it is a marked effect or influence on the mind. I got very much influenced by that person. So that is nothing but an impact. So what is happening? It is the action of one object coming forcibly in contact with another. So in impact, one object is stationary and other object is moving and colliding with the stationary object. Suppose I say I have very much got influenced by that person. That means my mind has got influenced by his thoughts. So I was stable, but because of the sudden impact of his thoughts, I got influenced. So it is the action of one object coming forcibly into contact with the other. So I will describe impact. It is the reaction of a stationary object to a collision with a moving object. A batsman hitting the ball or a denture is falling from your hand onto the hard ground. These are few examples of impact. Now in the impact process, the external forces and the resulting stresses are changing very rapidly. However, a moving object possesses a known amount of kinetic energy, and the energy of collision may or may not be absorbed by the material depending upon the resilience. If the material has got high resilience, then it will absorb the energy of the collision and it will deform elastically, otherwise it fractures due to impact. The impact is usually measured as ability to resist impact, and it is seen as KVR, where K is the proportionality constant. It represents the structural factor that are present in the design of the appliance. The design of the structure is important in relation to its ability to resist the impact. So the proportionality constant is very important. Then V is the volume of the object on which the impact is occurring and the resilience of the material. So it is KVR. Now resilience, as you know, it is represented by P square upon 2E. So we can again redefine as KVP square upon 2E. Now E is modulus of elasticity. Okay. So if the modulus of elasticity is high, if the modulus of elasticity high, the ability to resist impact is low. It's inversely proportional. And if the resilience of the material is high, the ability to resist the impact is more. If the volume is more, if the proportionality constant, if the structural design is good, then it is able to resist the impact. So that is about impact. So it is the collision between the stationary object and the moving object. So these are the few properties we have studied today. To summarize, we have seen what is a force, Force is nothing but a change in the motion of the body. Stress is the internal reaction to the external stimuli. Strain is the deformation of the body due to the external forces. Poisson's ratio is the ratio between the lateral strain and the longitudinal strain. Then we have seen proportional limit, the limit to which the stress and strain are proportional to each other. So it shows the proportionality between stress and strain, and the elastic limit. Then we have seen yield strength, ultimate tensile strength, modulus of elasticity, flexibility, resilience, and impact resistance. So again, we can go through this diagram. You will be able to understand now that this line represents the modulus of elasticity. A is the point of proportional limit up to which the stress and strain are proportional to each other. The area below this line is the resilience. Then a slight deviation from this line, that is point B, represents the elastic limit. Although by definition proportional limit and elastic limit are same, elastic limit has got little more amount of strain as compared to the stress. Then there is a point, yield point, which is just beyond the elastic limit, from which the plastic deformation starts up till the ultimate tensile strength. So till ultimate tensile strength, the material shows plastic limit. Now the brittle material usually shows fracture at this point, but if it has got some elastic properties, then it shows necking and later on it fracture at this point. So the area from A to E, the area under this complete curve, it represents the toughness. So these are few definitions we have seen today. These were my references. That is Phillips Science of Dental Materials, P.K. Basu and S. Mahalakshmi. Thank you for the patient hearing.